You know, I've been working in this realm of addiction and pornography for the last 12 years, and at a young age, I was first exposed. I was only 8 years old when I first saw pornography. I was at my friend's house, and his garage was full of junk. I mean, it's so much junk, but when you're 8 and you're in a garage full of junk, it's like a garage full of gifts. It's amazing, you know? One person's junk is another person's treasure, exactly. And so we're going through the garage and playing with all sorts of things that were uninteresting to me today, like carburetors and car parts and whatever. And so I finally eventually got bored with that and started looking through this rack of magazines. And there's sorts of magazines like Home and Garden. You know, when you're 8, it's like, wow, that's such an intriguing magazine, Home and Garden. You know, I was looking through that, just thinking, this is going to kill me. And then eventually I came upon a Playboy magazine. And at 8 years old, I looked at the cover of that magazine, and I thought to myself, honestly, I thought, this is the best day of my life. And I was like, wow, this doesn't look like Mom. You know, I started looking through the magazine, and there were all these amazing articles that I never really read, and yet there were these images that got stuck in my mind that day. And so I took the magazines, I put them down my shirt, I told my friend, I'm out, and I went home, went into my backyard, jumped over the fence, and I buried the girls in my neighbor's backyard. And then I visited them every single day. And I had friends over, and I took them to the backyard and introduced them to the ladies, and went back to Jamie's house, constantly getting more magazines. And when you're young, you know how you never know how to stop before it's too late? Right, so I just kept going and taking more and more, thinking no one will ever notice that there's a 4-foot section totally missing from the garage, you know. And I came around the corner one day with a stack of magazines, and there was Jamie's dad, face to face with me. And I looked at him, I just dropped the magazine, and I did what every 8-year-old does. I ran. I ran as fast as I could all the way home. And you know, that's what we do, isn't it? Sadly enough, for so many of us, we still run from situations like this instead of dealing with it. I ran home. My parents were getting ready to run errands, and I told them I love errands and I really want to go. And so we jumped in the car and we had a Saturday afternoon of errands. But in my head, I had this thought, I have to come home at some point. And we do. I know Jamie's dad's going to be there waiting to talk to my dad, and my game was going to be over. And sure enough, we pulled into the driveway. Jamie's dad was already halfway down the street. I went into the backyard, stood by our pool, and I waited. You know, waited to die, I thought. Heard the fence open, my dad's footsteps coming back. 8 years old, standing there next to our pool. It's the first time my dad and I ever talked about pornography. You know, I spoke to 183 sex offenders in prison recently. Behind bars, stood in there with these men and shared about the devastating impact of pornography, a story they all knew too well. I finished speaking, a man came up to me and he said, "You're lucky." And I said, "Lucky? How's that?" And he said, "Well, you're lucky your dad ever talked to you about the issue." The first time he said my dad and I ever talked about it was right there, and he pointed towards a table in the visiting section of the prison. And then he went on to tell me about his crime. You know, the reality is that if we can begin to have discussions and conversations about these issues, we can begin to have power over them. That they don't have to control us, they don't have to guide us in life into a direction that's opposite from God's intended plan, but we can begin to recognize what is hurting us and grab a hold of what will help us, to see that God's intention and God's plan for our life is far greater than porn can ever deliver. You know, because porn is a false reality. It promises you something it can never deliver. And it puts it deep in your heart, so you are drawn to it over and over again. Chemically, your body begins to become addicted to this reality, and it changes all of the relationships in your life.